Good evening. I'm Anne McLean from the library's concert office. We're so excited tonight to be welcoming back to the library an artist who is admired worldwide as an exceptional composer, conductor, and clarinetist, Jörg Widmann. Welcome. And you've brought with you, you have tonight brought with you such great partners. The Irish Chamber Orchestra, with whom you have a long relationship now, and the excellent soprano Claren McFadden, and a terrific program, your own music with Mendelssohn, Mozart, and also a bow to J.S. Bach. So we're pleased to be part of your tour. It's a super fast one.
That's right. We started in Wheaton near Chicago. Last night we played in my Carnegie Hall residency this season at Zankel Hall. And we are so excited to play our last concert now for this tour. Hopefully not our last ever here. And for me, I just told you backstage, it really feels like coming back home, coming back to this wonderful, wonderful hall. And we look forward very much to play this. I also would agree, really exciting and really in many ways unusual program for you.
Yeah, and you know, we were talking about the hall. This is a string orchestra program. You've really worked with them for several years and recorded their string repertoire, and this hall was built for string sound, so you're in for a remarkable experience. I wanted to ask you how you hooked up with the Irish Chamber Orchestra. How did you first meet them?
They invited me to play Mozart Clarinet Concerto with them many years ago, maybe 10, something like that. And we fell in love immediately, and one day they asked me if I want to be their kind of principal conductor, artistic partner. But at that time, I hadn't even conducted a lot, you know. So it was exciting for me, and to be honest, I learned so much from them on this journey, and hopefully I could give back to them a little bit of what, and in each rehearsal, you know. And it's mutual trust by now, and also the two last concerts, so exciting. It's the same program, but every night different. It will be different tonight again, because we love the risk. Yeah. Yes.
You know, this program is so beautiful. It has so many connections, and I want to just zip through them. I know your time is limited before you have to warm up and so on. But about programming in general, you have a passion for this and for connecting the music of the past with the great music of today, linking and connecting and cross-pollinating and so on. And I love this comment I read that you said, it sharpens the ears for the orchestra sound if you hear a solo piece next to an ensemble or next to piano pieces, vocal music, and others. And so I know that texture is very important for you and relating one work to another. If you want to talk a little bit how you conceive programs.
Well, first of all, we are living today, and of course Mendelssohn and Mozart lived at a different time, but I think there are so many correspondences. And I refer, as you will hear clearly, in my piece, Versuch über die Fuge, which you will hear before the interval where Claren McFadden will sing the soprano part, that without the Mozart Adagio and Fugue, which you will hear at the beginning of the second half, my piece would not be possible. And that's the first thing. I'm excited about programs where I'm really convinced you will listen to the modernity and dissonances in the Mozart piece in a different way when you have heard my piece, and the other way around, of course. And also to have a little piece is only for 6 people, a sextet. My very early piece, I was, I think, 19, 180 beats per minute, it's called. And they will play that a second piece in the second half. Again, afterwards, when you have the full string body afterwards, you will listen to that one in a different way again. So that would be, I mean, philosophy would be a too big word for, but I strongly believe in these programs, and it's exciting. Also have 2 soloists, you know, this wonderful singer Claren McFadden, and I play at the end of the program the orchestra version of the Weber Clarinet Quintet, which was very touching for us to hear. Last time I was here, I heard that Weber did a 2-piano version of this piece, which is, the manuscript is at the Library of Congress, And that's incredibly touching to play this piece tonight, knowing that the manuscript of this version is right here.
You know, I wanted to talk with you about your interest in Weber and your feeling that he is still underserved, perhaps is a way to talk about it. But I also wanted to ask you about, you have commented about the long programs that Mahler put together, 3 hours sometimes, and how such a diversity of variety of offerings, musical offerings within those. Did those influence you in your thinking?
So much. I mean, in the Mahler time, you know, they would program mainly music of their time. We should not forget that. There would be a Beethoven symphony in the program as one of the pieces, for sure, but Mahler would conduct one of his own new pieces, maybe of a colleague like Richard Strauss. There would be a singer playing with piano, a song cycle. So at that time, it seemed to be, first of all, that one would believe that you could do that to your audiences, first of all. So many times today, I feel from presenters, sometimes they're scared. Oh, our audience. But what's an audience? We are all individuals. And I don't believe, so it's like in my own composition, if I would ask you, do you like my bar number 1? You know, and I would change it. I think it would not be right, because I can only do what I believe in, and somebody else might have the completely different opinion. So first of all, the audiences were there for 3 hours, and by the way, tonight's program is a challenging and demanding program for us, but for you too. But I hope so exciting that that it pays off. Anyway, you asked me about Weber. For me, he is one of the most important composers. I can really say that. I really think he is a neglected, underrated composer. Which piece do we know? We know the Freischütz. That's played in even the big American opera houses. But even Oberon or Oriente, beautiful music, is not really played. His piano music, not anymore on the programs. But we should not forget that composers like Debussy and Stravinsky, two composers who were not particularly fans of German music, let's put it that way. No, really, both of them. I mean, Stravinsky having a suggestion for Beethoven 9, how it could be written better, you know. And Debussy, of course, who loved Wagner in when he was young, and then was very much opposed to him as the philosopher Nietzsche. He was a Wagnerian until he wrote these anti-Wagner texts at the end of his life. But these two composers, they praise Weber. So there's a Stravinsky saying, who said Weber was the duke of music, saying, praising his aristocracy and his nobleness. And he once said, Weber never wrote the note too much. And this you can only say about Haydn, Mozart, and I think also about Weber. And Debussy said, we, Impressionists, we think we have subtle colors in our orchestration, but Weber has shown us the way 100 years ago. And another French composer, Hector Berlioz, who was a contemporary of Weber, wrote in his instrumentation book, recommending to young composers how to write for a bassoon, for a horn, Weber. Oboe, Weber. The clarinet chapter, after some introductory lines, starts with the words, "Oh, Weber," and he was praising the Freischütz overture, how he wrote for the clarinet. And as a clarinetist, I must say, how he writes in the Freischütz overture, these two low clarinets in thirds, which makes you tremble and shake in anger and in fear, actually. That's another moment Berlioz mentions. So even as a clarinetist, I would not even invent something avant-garde like that. And there's a diminished chord, clarinet's very low, cello play above it, and then there's a diminished chord, and that's an effect. I mean, effect is maybe not the right word, but that's a new sound by Weber. He has a pizzicato and all the double basses at the same time with the timpani. And Berlioz writes, if there would be an ordinary, A major chord and pizzicato basses and timpani would not be even worth of mentioning it. But this chord with these unusual registers, this pizzicato plus timpani is the most the unheard of sound of that time. So, especially in the second movement, the Fantasia, you will hear, I mean, what would be, sorry for being a little bit long, but I really want to
No, this is great.
give a speech for Weber because, because really he is not, even amongst highly, amongst colleagues, musicians who I really love, we have a disagreement sometimes on Weber because what would be the cliche? The cliche would be, well, it scales upside down and, both ways and arpeggi and very virtuosic writing. The one which Stravinsky, by the way, liked. Stravinsky wrote a homage piece to Weber called Capriccio for piano and orchestra. Fantastic piece, also not played too many times. That would be the cliche. And you will hear a lot of virtuosity, almost to the edge of being playable. I mean, it's one of our Mount Everest pieces in terms of difficulty, digital finger difficulty and for the breath. But the center of the piece, the core of the piece is this Fantasia, and that's so deep music and heartfelt music. So the cliche would be, well, it's a little bit superficial. Even in the fast movements, he's never, ever superficial. He's ironic in the tradition of Haydn and Mozart. And we should not forget the wife of Mozart was Constanze Weber. So she was a part of the
family?
Weber dynasty
didn't make that
family.
connection.
And Weber was so aware when he would write for the clarinet that there are some other not too bad pieces by another master composer. Anyway, so this chromatic world is a modern world, and to me there are two modern pieces tonight. It's the Fantasia in the Weber Quintet and the Mozart Adagio and Fugue, which we will talk about. My pieces are the contemporary pieces from our time. I would rather emphasize the traditional aspects in my piece, but the Mozart and the Fantasia of the Weber, these are the modern pieces of tonight's program.
You know, I'm so excited that you talked about this because I was hoping you would specify some of the things, because I've read that you say the colors and the tonalities and the ideas that Weber has are what sometimes even surpass what you expect in early Wagner. And I was thinking to myself, what are those? You've just said what some of them are. Now we know why Wagner was so enthralled by hearing Weber. You read about that. He became passionate about this. He was a young boy, like 9 or 10 or something like that, and he heard Der Freischütz, and he was just taken away. It was an apotheosis, if that's a word. So he kept begging his sisters to play it again, the score that they got, and he started taking piano so he could play the score, all those kinds of things.
And when Weber died in London, and the dead body of London would be taken to Dresden, Wagner was organizing the ceremonies, the musical ceremonies in honor of Weber. And there was hardly any colleague of Wagner he would have done this for. And there's a moment shortly before the end of the Weber Quintet, a scary moment where the strings are suddenly playing tremolo. And if you hear only that place separately, it could be Wagner in a way. There are even to the extent, I don't want to say something against Wagner, I have the greatest admiration, but let's face it, Weber was 20 years earlier, and he happily, I don't want to say stole things, but he happily took the best things of Weber for his own operas.
So regarding I was going to say too, it's super, super operatic, this music, and as a clarinetist you'll hear. Also, it's incredibly athletic, and we could talk about that at length, and I want to get back to the opera part, but in terms of the playing and the virtuosity you mentioned, one of the thoughts that we had to ask you about was how so many people conduct and play. Violinists and pianists have been doing this for centuries, and other instrumentalists occasionally too, but I only know very seldom clarinetists do this. How do you manage? What are the challenges, let's put it that way, of conducting and playing?
Well, for tonight, it's a big challenge for me because there are different muscles involved, and for me it's. I told the orchestra today in the rehearsal last night's Carnegie concert. In the Mozart, the end, I always freak out so much, and I forget that I have to play Weber 9 minutes later than that. And when I started the Weber last night, I was still kind of out of breath. So physically, that's the physical aspect of tonight's program. Of course, it's challenging, but I like a challenge. I like challenges like that. It's risky to play after conducting a whole evening, to play such a virtuosic piece at the end, but for the programming and for your experience, hopefully, it's worth it. For the program, I could not have considered any other order. You know, a program is like a human being, or like a composition, you could say. If it has to be right. For me, that feels right. But this athletic aspect you mentioned, it's definitely in there. But it has to be. But it has to sound like Mozart, light and effortless. Yeah. That's the difficult thing.
Yeah, exactly. And in back to the program aspect that you put together such a beautiful program that also connects the individual composers to each other and to the final piece and so on. Back to the Mendelssohn. So these symphonies you've already recorded quite a few. Have you recorded the 8th yet?
No, we have recorded it. It's not released yet. We wanted to pair it with some, but it never was the perfect pairing. It is there, but still waiting to be released one day.
And these, I understand that Mendelssohn had an amazing laboratory experience, that his father was able to engage professional musicians for a tryout kind of orchestra when they had house music concerts at their family home, and they were from the Berlin, the main ensemble there in Berlin. Imagine having this. He was 12, 13, and 14 when he wrote these symphonies.
Can you imagine?
Amazing.
12, 13, 14. And this sheer craftsmanship of writing fugues and counterpoint, you will hear in the last movement, does not stop. You know, everybody else would get out of breath or be happy when you could write in a different way. You know, it's the most complex thing you can imagine. I mean, counterpoint in music in general. And I would even go as far as to say that Mozart, the other famous child prodigy, he did not have this knowledge in counterpoint.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you to talk about, because I learned for the first time that he learned about the Bach fugues from von Swieten.
And the piece you will hear tonight, the Adagio and Fugue, is such an unusual piece, and it would not be possible without Baron von Swieten, who opened generously his library, his famous library, where the Handel and Bach scores. So for Mozart, this was something new. Of course, he knew some, selected individual Bach Handel pieces, but there in the library, he was studying. And it says, in the biographies, Baron von Swieten had an orchestra, but most Mozart scholars now say it was probably a string quartet plus double bass. But the Adagio and Fugue, many scholars say Mozart did not even think about a public performance. It was for this intellectual circle of Baron von Swieten, and I have the impression Mozart simply wanted to prove that he can write in this style too. So the fugue starts, bom, 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 ba-da-da-da-dim, bim, bom. What is it, basically? It's Bach. Dim, bim, bim, bom. Art of the Fugue, musical offering. So that's what it basically is. So if we would judge a human being only from the outward appearance, which we should never do, but if we would, the coat he wears, or the wig he wears, is Baroque. You would think when it starts, it's a piece, in a French style, French overture style, by a Baroque master. The harmonies are so harsh, and the chromaticism, when one voice goes this way, there will be a clash with the second voice. The third voice will do something completely different, and the fourth plays the inversion or the mirror of the inversion of the fugue theme. It's an incredible, only 5-minute long piece, 4 or 5 minute long, but the most condensed and intense, structure you can imagine. A really extraordinary piece. But there are counterpoint studies by Mozart, like 7-bar sketches, and he gives up most of the time, you know? So it was not really home territory for him. That would be my theory. Therefore, when Mozart writes counterpoint, like in these pieces, or in Jupiter Symphony at the end, it's so masterful, and what he says is even of a deeper, even for Mozart standards, you know, even something deeper he has to say there, because it's not easy for him to. We have the image of Mozart. Well, God himself gave him this, and he just wrote it. Well, it might be true to a certain extent. I'm not completely against this rather romantic view. There is something, which cannot be explained by only human standards in Mozart. We all agree on that. But here he had to simply sit down and work hard. Even in Mozart Clarinet Concerto, which I love so much, when there is counterpoint and it's a late piece, Köchel 622, Requiem, his last piece, 626. Even there, when over, he seems to be happy. This place is over. So counterpoint, Mendelssohn, as 12-year-old, he was already a master.
Yeah, really. You know, this is a good segue into your essay or the attempt at a fugue. But before moving on, you mentioned Dissonance a moment ago, and I know that's the title of your lectures at Carnegie. So let's not forget that. He has 2 lectures coming up on Dissonance and Beauty is the main title of them, and it would be sort of. Will those go online, by the way? Do you know?
I'm not sure. I did not see cameras, but maybe. Like many times in our lives, there are.
Well, maybe just to encapsulate before talking about the essay piece, what gave you this title, this particular title? It's such a great, arresting title.
Well, for sure, I had the feeling of a shortcoming in my own works, in my own composing about counterpoint. You know, all my teachers always told me, Hans-Werner Henze, when I came to him, the first lesson I will not forget, he said, with a very strict voice, you know, very serious, he said, I look forward to that we can work together, but, you know, the precondition is you have to study the fugue's counterpoint, you know, so counterpoint. And every teacher told me this, so they offered it to me like a beer turned sour. Can you say that, you know? And I never accepted it, and that was stupid of me. I was young and stupid. Only years later, when I felt myself a lack of something in my music, actually it was a lack of counterpoint, you know. But it's the privilege of a young person, I think. You write it, you know, and that's it. But at a certain point, it's not enough anymore. And then I decided, okay, I have to write a whole series of counterpoint pieces, and this is maybe the strictest piece in terms of canons. Actually, it's called, it has the fugue in the title. It should be actually, to be precise, the canon, the strictest form of.
So it's only the one
fugue.
subject, right?
Exactly, and really, literally, you know, how do you say, repeating it. So, other than in other pieces of mine, in this piece, every note you can explain mathematically, so to speak, you know, by an inversion of the theme, or a mirror of the theme, or a mirror of the inversion of the theme. That is one aspect. The other aspect is I wrote a string quartet cycle. Right now I'm writing my string quartet number 7 and struggling with it. Happily, but struggling with it. And string quartets number 6 to, I don't know, 9 or 10 one day, will be called Studies on Beethoven. It will be a new cycle.
Like the new one you're doing at Carnegie now.
Exactly. And my string quartets number 1 to 5, they form one cycle. And the piece you will hear tonight was originally for string quartet and soprano, was the 5th string quartet attempt of the fugue. And I made an instrumentation for it, for my orchestra, for the Irish Chamber Orchestra. We premiered this version some years ago. And I really completely rewrote the piece. I have a kind of mirror or a kind of doppelganger of the soprano, which is the oboe. We have, and this is owed to the fact that we have a fantastic oboe player, principal oboe in our orchestra, Dan Bates, who will play tonight. But not only that, I needed another voice and double bass. Sometimes I double the cello with the double bass, like in traditional music. But I added to pre-existing contrapuntal structures further counterpoints, and that's something painful as composer, because when something is, if you like it or not, perfect in itself, like a counterpoint structure, adding one more destroys the whole thing. So I had to reopen all the structures again, and so on. So you will hear this version of that piece tonight.
And the texts, I wanted to ask you, they're from Ecclesiastes. Which verses, which phrase?
Number 1, and some others. You will all know these famous Vanitas, Vanitatum, Omnia Vanitas. How is it?
It's vanity, 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 all is vanity.
All is vanity.
Had you worked with her before, with Claron before?
Yes.
She's remarkable.
Ah, she is. You will hear it. I mean, she starts the piece, and I know each time it will break my heart again, and it happens again. You know, it's. I don't want to say too much, but it's really her ability to sing like an instrument and to blend with the oboe. Last night in the concert, there was one moment, even I could not tell anymore. Is she still singing, or is the oboe already playing? They were blending so incredibly. Sorry, I lost.
You know, this is a good question for you about how you use the voice in this piece. And last year, you received the Robert Schumann Prize, which is a very prestigious prize for poetry and music. And it was interesting to me because I hadn't associated you with poetry so much. And then, of course, I know you've written operas and so on, and maybe you could tell us about new projects in that way. But they talk about this prize as for being for personalities with an outstanding lifetime achievement in the field of poetry. And the other folks who have run this, the other composers were Pierre Boulez, your teacher Riem, Wolfgang Riem, and Aribert Reimann. But what I was interested to read about was they were saying that even when you don't have, this is from the jury comments about Jörg's music, even when it eschews all forms of vocalization, his music is as eloquent as any text-based work of art. And it talks about the deep significance of vocal feeling and an intense commitment to a poetic gesture with the line and things like this. So I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit about your work in this regard with vocal music.
I was really very honored to receive this prize because next to Weber, Schumann, Weber, Mendelssohn, and Mozart, who I love, Schumann would be maybe the composer I identify most with in many ways. And my students in Berlin, they were recently bringing up the idea we should do an analysis of the Dichterliebe together of Schumann. And for 1.5 hours, we actually analyzed song number 1 and 2 only, because there are so many textures and layers and meanings, different codes, and it's incredible. So so now I know what I forgot before you asked me about the text. Of course, this Ecclesiastes text, and I want to mention one thing about it. This all is in vain, in vanity. This whole text, and there's another line in this piece, one generation comes and it leaves, the next generation comes, but the earth will stay always. in our time we don't even know that for sure. But when you have text like that, or the other one is, I say it in my not good English, it's different, of course, in the proper Bible translation, but the sun goes up, the sun goes down, and again, but the earth will always remain. So what are these texts? I think they're amongst the most skeptical texts of world literature. And Schumann wrote once in his opus 102, the first movement is called Vanitas Vanitatum, and then what he writes for the musicians is mit humor, with humor. So, and then the piece goes da-dim, pam pam pa-da-dam, be-di, da-da, pa-da-dam, be-di, pa-da-dam. So what kind of humor is that?
Yeah.
So when Schumann writes with humor or with good humor sometimes, then it gets really scary with Schumann. No, but I wrote a song cycle for Christian Gerhaher as a Schumann homage called the Das heiße Herz, the fiery heart, or would be the literal translation. So here the text was the reason for the fugue and canon structures, because when you have some certain, you have to write circle canons. Well, this sun image, for example. And for me, the voice becomes more and more important. I come from an instrument, of course. I mean, I started playing the clarinet at the age of 7. But once you start writing for the voice, you get addicted. And of course, in my Babylon opera, it's 3 hours of choir and 100 people choir and 20 singers, soloists singing. I will continue for sure. Right now, because you asked me, there is not a precise project for opera I'm working on yet, but I feel it's about to
germinate. Maybe,
yes, absolutely. I can
right?
feel it will take only some more months until something.
So these things are it's just wonderful to talk with you about, and so many connections. You are creating an ongoing, with your life, an ongoing homage that is a dialogue and constant conversation with music of today. And this is what you're known for, really, worldwide. It's exciting to see what's happening at Carnegie. And I wanted to say that, to ask you, what are the highlights for you of the coming year? He will be in residence as the Richard and Barbara Debs Chair of Composition at Carnegie, which is a huge task in itself, but also the Cleveland Orchestra and the Munich Philharmonic, I believe, will play your music and so on. What for you, what are you looking forward to this year as a statement you can make as a musician?
You mentioned all the Carnegie Hall, really exciting events. There are some, I will conduct a modern music ensemble and so on. What is very touching for me, I studied at Juilliard in 1994-95, and they asked me to return to them to conduct the Juilliard Orchestra, the student orchestra. And that's such an honor for me, because I remember how much I learned in this orchestra. There was a reading of Sacre du Printemps of Stravinsky with Pierre Boulez. It was quite an arrogant orchestra, you know, because in the back of the second violins there sits a winner of Tchaikovsky competition in Moscow, and so they did not, we did not always behave so well. But when Boulez came, we were speechless, because he heard everything. He said, you know, there's this famous bassoon solo at the beginning, so high, to play for the bassoon, everybody is nervous about it. So Boulez came in cool, as always, as he was relaxed. He said, "Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Mr. Bassoon player. Relax. We start with the second part." So a master of psychology. So I was sitting next to the bassoon player. So he leaned back. He felt. So the second part starts with wind chords. So we started with that. He interrupted us after the third chord and said, "Third horn too sharp, second clarinet too low." And so he did it again, and the chord was just perfect. This orchestra was, you know, he could have done anything from that after that. moment. And normally, especially youth orchestra, you know, you leave after when the rehearsal is over. Everybody wants to have lunch or fun or whatever. We were all sitting there for another 10 minutes because we were still could not believe what had happened. And I have played in this orchestra my first solo of Hebrides overture of Mendelssohn, and I programmed that piece. And there was a competition now amongst the violinists at Juilliard, and a young woman will play my incredibly complex second violin concerto in that program, and we will perform the Jupiter Symphony in the end. So that's something I look forward, and I can't wait to work with the young people on that project. I'm at the same time as my Carnegie Hall residence, I'm in residence with the Palau, the concert hall in Barcelona, and at the Casa da Musica in Porto. So I will travel a lot this year, but you know, if you ask me about a kind of credo, I would really say you said it much more beautifully than I could do it. What you said about my programming, I try anywhere where I am. I really try, also in my Carnegie Hall lecture the other night, I try to make it possible to listen to things in a different way. How can a silence sound differently? And now I can't wait to share our program together with you.
This is perfect. Thank you so much. Do you want to take a question or two, or
Absolutely.
just maybe a couple questions before he
Since
has
I
to
don't play
warm up?
since I don't play the first piece, otherwise I would have to warm up.
Anybody have a question?
Thank you very much. Hi, I wanted to ask whether or not your fifth string quartet and the Weber Quintet will be performed in the original instrumentation, or have they been rescored for the entire chamber orchestra?
It's a very good question. We did our own version of the Weber Quintet because, again, so most of the things what was the first violin is now 6 first violins. But the double bass part, for example, that gives completely new possibilities of pizzicato. You know, when the celli play arco at the same time, and there are some remarkable moments which you only hear actually in the chamber orchestra version, and there are major changes in my string quartet. There are many changes. Some places are still for string quartet. Then there are places one violin plays. Always one line, by the way. Then the second, they join in. Third player, fourth player, fifth player, sixth player. Same thing happens with this. So you have the impression something is far away and it kind of comes closer, or the other way. So in my piece there are major changes considering or comparing it with the original string quartet version.
Thank you very much.
Any other takers? No? No? Okay. Yeah.
Excuse me.
Americans don't get a chance to hear orchestras or ensembles from Ireland all that often. Is there a distinctive sound coming out of Dublin or Galway or wherever?
It's a wonderful question, and I always ask myself these questions about the famous poetry. All these poets are from Dublin. What is it? I love the Irish culture, the mentality of the orchestra, you know? But I would not dare to put it in words, what it is. It's something very difficult. It's like something to talk about the German orchestra sound. Very difficult, and even difficult to verify it today. So what I can talk about is what we have been working on the last 8 years is really sound, and these Mendelssohn string symphonies are the best thing for the health of an orchestra, because you have to polish everything. Everything is heard. If something is out of tune, everything is being heard. So the main aspect I would mention is the sheer enthusiasm of every player. You know, I love what they do. I could talk about technical aspects, about sound, yes. To me, the most important thing, this enthusiasm, and you know, once we feel it in the night, you know, and maybe we play double tempo from last night, but we go for it. Maybe that's something Irish, I don't know, but with Irish Chamber Orchestra, fascinating. I fall in love with them every night.
Anybody else? So maybe not. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.